Hey everyone. This time we read Baldur's Gate 2 by Matt Bell. So like a lot of the books that Boss Fight Books puts out, this one focuses more on the author's life and his experiences with the game and how it sort of reminds him of his childhood and kind of shaped who he is now in some way. He does walk us through the game, which I do appreciate because it kind of explains a little bit about, what the game is, what you do in the game, and the story. It helps out, especially for somebody like me that just didn't really know much about the game and just kind of picked this up because they wanted to know more about the author or because they also, like myself, know the publisher and kind of trust them that they're going to put out a book that's really good. So there's a few things going on in this that I really like. Matt talks a little bit about Baldur's Gate, and he goes into some of the game mechanics and talks about a little bit how kind of old-fashioned they are, where you have violence done to your character at the very beginning. The bad guy does some pretty horrific stuff to you when you first start this game out, and your goal is to kind of reciprocate that violence by killing the bad guy. But you never really reflect on what you do throughout the game, where you're basically murdering every enemy that comes your way. Your characters don't ever comment on it, none of the townsfolk comment on it, and as long as you keep that good reputation, nothing really changes about what's happening. Nobody mentions the fact that you're just slaughtering hundreds of people with absolutely no consequences. He also goes into the romances a little bit, which I found interesting, where you can basically pursue a romance, and it's like a mini game where you do this, you get the win condition that you want, and then it's never really brought up until the very end of the game, where you get a little bit of, talk with you and whoever your love interest was. So the first of the things that I found really interesting, though, was his talk about growing up and how he had these interests with Dungeons and Dragons, which kind of explains Baldur's Gate, and also with like fantasy and sci-fi, and how when he was growing up he always kind of tried to hide those, which I can kind of relate to. You get bullied a lot when you were a kid back in the 90s and you liked D&D, or you honestly played video games, or you liked fantasy stuff, especially when you got on into high school, and that stuff really was kind of looked down upon. Even, I remember even in the 6th grade getting made fun of because I was reading Lord of the Rings, mostly because I was reading in my spare time, and that was apparently weird, and people didn't think that I should be doing that. He does talk a little bit about his life, and then he compares it to his younger brothers, where he constantly is like giving up his childhood as he gets older, and his brother never did that. And he talks about how when he did research and went to revisit this stuff, he would call back to his brother. So it's kind of like that, I wouldn't say reconnecting with your sibling, but it's kind of like reestablishing that shared connection that you had when you were growing up. He even talks about starting up, or at least joining in his brother's Dungeons and Dragons games, which I found really interesting that he picked that back up for the book, and also for another thing that I'll talk about in a minute. It was just really cool to read that, and it kind of was... It's one of those moments in a book that just sort of like makes you smile and makes you happy when you read something like that. So the part about research, he talks about a second book in this, where he worked with another author to collaborate on a Dungeons & Dragons novel called The Last Garrison. And he talks about how he was initially kind of not really wanting to do it, but came around to actually jumping in. He talks about how it was kind of hard at first, but he just dove right back in to kind of rediscover stuff about Dungeons and Dragons. So throughout the book, you have these things running along with each other. You have him reminiscing about his childhood, you have him going through the game, and then you have him talking about, making this book. All three of them are intertwined, and I think he does a great job of explaining how each one is related in some way. So while talking about writing the Dungeons & Dragons book, he mentions he went to, basically over his summer, he went to this writing class. And it sounds like a pretty intensive class. He mentions that in the book. And I honestly find it really crazy. He would fly from Michigan to New York to take this thing, and it would be like an all-day event. It sounds absolutely crazy. The thing is, you would go there and you would read your story to the teacher, and the teacher would just basically tear your story apart. And it makes a lot of sense. If you're a writer, you kind of need somebody to do that. But while I was looking at this, I kept thinking, like, it sounds like the teacher is trying to get people to write in the style that he wants them to write in. So the style that's successful for him, which is really more of like a minimalist style, kind of keeping everything down in the book and making people like go through all this stuff in their heads and whatnot. That works for some people. It's not necessarily the way that I write, which might explain why I'm a terrible writer. So a bunch of the things that I really like about the book is how he weaves all the narratives together, and that he also throws in some tips for like young writers and people like that. Just gives you words of encouragement and gives you some ideas of like what you should be doing when you're writing, and kind of gives you like that helping hand that some writers definitely need when they start out. I'm not sure if that was like intentional, but that was just kind of what I was picking up when I was reading this. He's letting you kind of see into his life, he's letting you see into his interests, and he's sort of saying, like, this is what I was doing, this is the stuff that inspires me. You need to find the things that inspire you and write about those. That was just what I was picking up from reading this book. You guys might pick up something else, but for me, that's what I was getting out of this. There really isn't much that I dislike in this book. If I had to, like, reach for something, I kind of felt that the talk about the relationship with his brother and kind of that getting rekindled, I feel like that kind of dropped off during near the end of the book. It was replaced with other stuff, like him writing his Dungeons and Dragons book, and kind of reliving and sort of coming to acceptance with his, I guess, kind of like nerd culture hobbies and everything like that. So while it fell off, it was replaced with things that still went along with it. It was something that I noticed. So that's going to wrap it up, guys. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a great day, everyone.